What's the most horrifying, how do you not know how to do this moment you've experienced with another person whilst adulting? Story 1. This is in part due to being rich enough to be out of touch, and in part a general lack of general adult skills. In college, I had a friend named Mally. She was a couple years younger than the rest of the people in our group and still lived at home with her parents due to their very strict culture and beliefs about how an unmarried woman should not live away from home. But her dad was a doctor and also had family money, so they were quite wealthy in our area. The sort of wealthy where for her 16th birthday, they bought her a Porsche, and when they didn't think she thanked them adequately for it, they returned it. Anyway, I remember when the group of us were at some of the guys' on-campus apartment, the toilet clogged. Mally, without really blinking, said we should call our plumber to get it fixed. Of course, the guys were like, no, it's just clogged. Why would we call a plumber? To which Mally, who was very confused, replied, because that's what plumbers do. Why would you do it yourself? So we then explained first how expensive plumbers are, and second, how the average person does not call a plumber for a slightly clogged toilet. Mally was confused and then asked, well, what do you do when a light bulb burns out? Change it yourself? And obviously we were all nodding and saying, yeah, absolutely. So that was when we discovered just how sheltered and out of touch Mally was with how normal people do things. We specifically learned that she didn't know how to do laundry, change a light bulb, plunge a toilet, cook literally anything, put gas in her car, all because either the maids did it for her, also worth noting, having maids is extremely rare in our area, or her dad did it. It blew her mind when we explained that those are very normal things to know how to do, and ended up showing her how to do all those things. She really hated it, but it did a lot to make her a more self-reliant adult. Her parents really sheltered her so much, so it wasn't totally her fault. We have toilets with very powerful flushes, and they have literally never clogged in the nearly 10 years since we bought the house. My children probably have no idea how to plunge a toilet. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will put this on my list. Do you think that's part of a bit of control on the parents' part? I know it has to do with culture and religion according to the story, but I think it was to somewhat, either consciously or subconsciously, foster Mally being under the control of the parents. What do you think? Do you think she would ever live out on her own? Story 2. Not sure if I'd call it horrifying, but pretty ridiculous nonetheless. It's about me. I just moved into my first home in February of this year. I live alone and am single. Earlier this month, I mowed my lawn for the first time. I have never mowed a lawn before, but I'm thinking, how hard can it be? The answer? Not hard at all. Prior to that, I had roped my brother into coming over and doing it for me, but this time I figured I needed to actually learn. The lawnmower is an old push mower from my dad's that he had brought over about a month ago, and he quickly gave me the rundown on how to use it. So I was half paying attention, plus, it's a lawnmower. So anyway, I go to start it up. It takes me at least 10 tries of pulling the cord as hard as I can with no luck until finally it fires up. I then proceed to begin mowing, and I know this thing is self-propelling. It says so right on it, but I cannot for the life of me figure out why it's so hard to push. The wheels aren't locked or anything, so I just figured it's a combination of me not having much upper body strength and my lawn having a lot of uneven spots and divots that prevented the mower from moving smoothly. I finally finished, Sweating my butt off like I had just finished seriously working out. My yard is very small. Even I finished the front and back in about a half hour, 40 minutes. Upon reflection, I'm still not convinced that the mower was self-propelling. I mean, I know I'm not strong and am somewhat petite, but still. So I'm sharing this story with friends and coworkers like, what the hell did I do wrong? And they're all asking me about this lever. And I'm like, yeah, obviously I had to hold the lever down or the motor kills. Well, it turns out there's a second lever that you have to squeeze in order to propel the mower. I manually pushed that freaking thing around my whole yard, divots, hills, and all. Ended up with a blister on my thumb and sweating profusely through my shirt. Not to mention the few times I stopped it and had to restart it. I pulled the cord literally at least 20 times to get it to start again. I was waiting for one of my neighbors to come over and ask me if I needed help. The struggle was that obvious. I also learned about the little button that you push a few times to make starting easier. So yeah, mowed today. And let's just say that things went significantly better than last time. Growing up, my dad or brother would mow. And in college up until now, I've always lived in apartments or duplexes, nothing that requires residents to do any lawn care. So at the age of 32, I have finally learned to use a lawnmower. Well, at least he got started on the project. Yeah, I can just imagine all these neighbors looking at this person wondering why in the world is he struggling with the lawnmower so much. Maybe they just didn't know this person well enough to come up and ask him. I don't know their relationship. And I think it's partially on this guy for not paying attention to the dad. That is, if the dad really went into detail about how a lawnmower works, which I kind of think he should have. Story 3. In my early 20s, I was really poor. I lived across from a Dollar General and would frequent it for odds and ends. Frequently. There was an 18 to 22-year-old girl who worked the cash register who I assumed was on the spectrum of sorts. She couldn't make eye contact and was very obviously socially awkward. She was also often very dirty and always smelled of BO. It was always weird to me because they sold deodorant. She also had one hand that was much smaller and less mobile than the other. I was always kind to her, despite being the slowest on the cash register, part to her physical speed capabilities, part to her painful customer interactions. She constantly overshared, uncomfortably. It was what it was. It didn't bother me. I honestly felt bad for the girl and would occasionally see bruises on her smaller hand/arm and wonder if she was abused. One day I walked into the good old DG looking to pick up some cleaning supplies and shampoo and saw they had a clothing sale. Before you judge, I was poor and they didn't have the worst clothing. The sale was that certain color sticker items were $1. I browsed and actually found 5 things that weren't too terrible, some pajamas, some leggings, and a piece of athletic wear. So I brought up all my items, waited for a while as the girl was at the register, and brought up my 5 $1 clothing items, a spray cleaner, and a bottle of shampoo, both of which were also $1. She scanned them and said, $53. I kind of anticipated this, so I pointed to the literal 3 signs about the sale right around the register. There must have been 25 signs through the small store. I wasn't angry. She looked at me, and I explained the sticker color matches the sale, and they need to be discounted. She thinks for a good long while, looking at the register, clearly in pain and not knowing what to do. Eventually, she scans these 7 items again, hits a bunch of buttons, then says, "Okay, $24. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I knew she was slower, but discovering that she couldn't figure out 5 plus 2 should be 7 and tax absolutely shocked me and truly bummed me out. Myself and the customer behind me just stared, not knowing what to do for far too long. I eventually asked if there was anyone else working who could help. She used the store phone to call in another coworker back in from their break. I stopped seeing her after a while, which was to be expected. I think of her often. I hope she's okay. What do you think the deal was? Do you think she was on the spectrum? Do you think they ever schooled her on how to use the register? Do you think she had a little trouble? I mean, there's just so many explanations you could go for on this, and I'm just wondering how in the world she was holding on to this job and was still doing it like this. What do you think? Story 4. This isn't just one person, but I've come to the realization that many adults no longer have the ability to read a map or follow simple driving directions to a new place, as they are completely reliant on GPS telling them when and where to turn. 2 instances that stand out. A person in my office building was standing at the door asking everyone coming and going if they'd seen a car mount GPS unit in the parking lot, as they'd lost it bringing it in somehow. They were sobbing, so I figured it must be an expensive model. I asked what it was, but it was cheap, and helped them look around under cars to see if we could find it, during which we talked. They were crying over the price of losing it. They were crying because they didn't know how they'd get home that night without it. Couldn't drive home from a job they'd worked at for months without a GPS telling them how. I was out with a friend doing some shopping in a part of a city we'd never been to before. We were in the parking lot of store A and wanted to get to store B, which we could see, but there wasn't a connected road between the two. Friends punch in the store on their iPhone to get directions, and it gives off a 30-minute route that includes 2 toll roads. I thought there was no way it should take that much to drive to get there, so I looked at Google Maps and saw we could drive it in about 3 minutes by going 2 stores over and exiting from the back of that store parking lot onto the road that leads to store B. They could not look at the map and then translate it to the real world, despite that we could literally see all the features we needed to follow. He ended up taking the 30-minute route and paying the tolls because he didn't trust the map. I've seen a lot of other experiences similar to this, but those are the 2 that always stand out to me. Story 5. Before the shutdown happened, I was working in a bar. We had this kid who got hired as a barback, and he apparently just couldn't keep up. It was a pretty busy place, especially on the weekends, and barbacks had to be on top of stuff constantly. After about 3 weeks, management decides he isn't going to cut it as a barback and pushes him into the kitchen with me. I was glad to have help because we always had issues with keeping cooks on for some reason. Holy hell, this kid could not do anything. He lacked basic common sense for practically everything. We started him on fry station, but he would mess up the most basic of tasks. He didn't even know how to make fries. I told him how to do our catfish, 3 planks tossed in cornmeal and flour. He tossed the first 2, but then dropped the 3rd completely bare. I asked him why he did that, and he had no answer. Then we tried putting him on the grill. He couldn't make toast or toast buns. He would always burn them. Last, we tried having him run the center and call out tickets, but it seemed like he could barely read. There were multiple times I had to kick him out of the kitchen because he was so slow or just completely zone out. One of the servers was his cousin, and she told me that both his dad and brother had to fire him from separate jobs because he wouldn't do his stuff or wouldn't show up. Then, of course, one night, he was still out back after he clocked out and was talking to someone at length about doing mushrooms and acid. Guess we know why he can't hold down a job. Told him to do something one night while I ran to the restroom. Came back, and he was gone. Good riddance, Brandon. If you're reading this, I hate your guts. Story 6. My mom and I moved in with my grandparents when I was 10 years old. You know, old enough to have learned how to do some basic chores and certainly old enough to be taught more. Unfortunately, my grandmother, God bless her, was not only terrified of fire, her mother had a problem with accidentally setting things on fire, but she was also a neat freak that insisted on doing everything herself so it was done right. My mom married my stepdad when I was 14 years old, and we moved into a house together as a family. He was horrified to learn that at nearly 15 years old, I did not know how to wash and dry my own clothes, iron, load a dishwasher, or even use the stove. I could use the oven because I baked with my other grandmother when I visited, but I had never used the stovetop. There were many more things he had to teach me, but those were the things that really had him worried about my ability to care for myself as an adult. It wasn't that my grandmother didn't want me to be able to care for myself. Her fears were just so intense that she didn't think about how not knowing these basic skills would affect me later in life. I am forever grateful to my dad for being the dad I needed, because deity knows the biological one couldn't be bothered. Mom couldn't overrule her own mother when we lived with her, and by the time she married Dad, she was sleeping at the hospital 5 nights a week because her schedule was so insane. I don't even want to think about who I would be if I hadn't had him to teach me, but I'm pretty sure I would have had to live off of chocolate chip cookies, brownies, and takeout through my 20s if it weren't for him. I probably would have smelled pretty bad for the lack of clean clothes, too. Hero stepdad is a hero. That's a great story. Nice of him to step up. A lot of the stuff I've been reading, you hear about the stepdad being not a good person and abusive. I'm not saying all of them are like that, and this story is proof of that. But it's good to hear a story where a stepdad stepped up. Story 7. I have a couple. I once had my ex's parents coming over and needed some help cleaning the house up to get ready for their arrival. I asked my ex to clean the bathroom for me whilst I cleaned the kitchen, and left him to it. I went in about a half an hour later, and the bathroom was somehow dirtier, but the ex was sitting on the couch chilling. When I asked him why he hadn't cleaned the bathroom, he looked at me all confused and said he had. I asked him to come in and pointed out all the soap scum everywhere and how it was clearly not clean. He reiterated that he'd cleaned it. I asked him to show me how. He proceeded to pick up a bar of soap, lather up his hands real good, and just rub everything. He didn't even rinse it after, just rubbed everything with soapy hands, and couldn't understand why I was staring at him open-mouthed. Same guy, a few months later, I asked him to mash some potatoes I'd boiled whilst I plated up dinner. He very literally did so, without draining out the water. Again, he didn't think what he'd done was in any way wrong, despite the weird texture and look of the potatoes. Why, yes, I am a fellow human being, like yourself, and native to your planet. Your ex, probably. Story 8. I had to explain and show to my older brother that you can and should clean your Phillips beard trimmer from inside the little bits as well. We both got the same exact model as a gift on Christmas, I think, and it turns out he hadn't opened up and cleaned the little rotary bits the entire time he had it. Years. Literally years, at least 5, and was complaining how it's very slow and probably needs to be replaced with a new one. I thought, that's weird, mine's around the same age and is still perfectly fine. So I turn it on, and it makes this very gritty sound, like the machine is so slow as if it's dying and stuff, even though it's fully charged. I open it up, and deity damn, the little rotary blades were so clogged up with years-old dust and hairs, it was a miracle the thing was still working at all. Turns out he didn't even know you could open them. I cleaned it all nice and clean, and the thing started working good again, as much as it can afterward. Read instructions, please, before you disregard something as broken. Like deity, damn. Oh, brother. Guess we know which one got the brains. Story 9. My ex didn't know how to hold a fork properly. All utensils were used by grasping it in a fist. Also, didn't know how to open up baby wipes. He tore open the bag. It has a lid so they don't dry out. He ignored the lid. Didn't know how to merge or change lanes. He wouldn't check blind spots or accelerate. Would actually frequently slow down and turn into cars. I attribute his lack of accidents to other safe drivers on the road. He would instead use a blinker when backing out of parking spaces. So people knew which way he was backing out at? Didn't know to rinse vegetables or fruits before eating. Basic stuff, like how? Don't get me started on any food prep. I often felt like a parent more than a partner, and it got old, constantly having to teach him things he was never told or taught. The scariest one is the driving thing. The other stuff, there could be a friend or someone, maybe take him back to the parents to kind of touch up on that kind of stuff. But not knowing how to merge or change lanes? No, I'd never ride with this person again. I'd almost front the money for driving lessons as a refresher. Story 10. So, some background info. My dad is a mechanic, so I've been very lucky to have the importance of vehicle maintenance drilled into my head from a young age. When my now fiancée and I were dating for about 6 months, I needed to change the oil in my car, so I asked when the last time she had changed her oil. She had never changed it after owning the car for 3 years. I immediately brought it to my dad's place as I wasn't sure what to expect. We decided to add oil to properly flush it once we changed the oil a week later. It took 3.5 quarts of oil, and the engine only holds 4 quarts total. Car still runs 2 years after regular oil changes later. To paraphrase my dad, it speaks to the quality of Kia/Hyundai engines since most cars would have seized up given how low it was for so long. My father-in-law, who was an engineer, didn't believe in preventative maintenance, including oil changes. Sole reason we drive Hondas is because of the quality of their engines. His last Honda never had an oil change in the 10-plus years he owned it, and still ran when they sold it because he couldn't drive anymore. Story 11. 1. Training a new girl at work, and she told me she didn't know how to sweep. I had to show her. 2. Training a new girl at work, her dishes are often still greasy after being washed. I asked her about it, and I asked her when she put the soap on, and she replied, straight-faced, "Oh, you use soap here?" We had raw meat on many of those dishes. 3. My ex told me he thought mixing dark and light loads of laundry was a myth after destroying a bunch of my clothes. He also told me soaking dishes had no effect. Not gonna lie, I never separate lights and darks, and I've never had a problem.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 12. My girlfriend refuses to accept how STDs work and believes they randomly appear out of nowhere. And even when I tell her they spread from person to person, she says, "That's not possible. Where did the first person get it?" So I explain it in detail, and she just goes, "You're only making me feel stupid. You always do this," and then doesn't talk to me for ages. Too long, didn't read. My girlfriend refuses to accept scientific facts about STDs and then blames me for making her feel stupid. You, should probably get tested if you haven't already. She thought they randomly appeared out of nowhere? Is this like the social disease version of Pokemon? To be honest, a lot of the names for those diseases kind of sound like Pokemon. Hey, a wild gonorrhea appears. Story 13. In my honors dorm at Purdue, there was a computer science major named Jeffrey. He was well known because his parents would stop by every week to pick up his laundry and bring him a case of Fiji water with expensive groceries. His dad was a doctor. We commented on Jeffrey's long, gross toenails and how he needs to cut them. He told us they're long because his mom hasn't visited in weeks, and she was the one who cut them. His mother cut her 19-year-old son's toenails. Disgusting. We had to give him a lesson on it. Thought you were going to say his mom never taught him, so he just lets them grow out indefinitely. How naive I was. That is so much worse. Story 14. My housemate, 24-year-old post-grad student, not realizing that 1. You need to preheat an oven. 2. You need to defrost frozen meat before cooking it. 3. You need to use a baking tray. After I caught her lining the bottom of our oven with frozen chicken drumsticks. You need to preheat an oven. Not if I just add a few minutes. I'm not making 3 trips to the kitchen for 1 toaster oven full of pizza rolls. Story 15. Freshman year in college. Had a roommate who was older, 20, because he went to a junior college for 2 years first. He started dating this girl, and after a few months, they decided to have spicy time. He asked if we could talk because the night had come for this planned encounter. He was a virgin and had questions. Pretty normal conversation until he asked, "How do I know when to stop?" That's actually a fair question. I mean, it's answered by the same thing as probably most of the other questions. Communicate with your partner. But unless you're being a selfish lover, there isn't an obvious stopping point. I think for most of us, there's one significant event, something that happens that kind of signals that you've reached your goal. For men, I will admit. Girls, it's a little different. They sometimes don't have that same thing we have. I am in very deep water right now with the YouTube algorithm if I don't stop right now. Story 16. Had a guy constantly asking what time it is. By the 6th time, I said, "Bro, there's a clock right there." He said, "I don't know how to read it." Grown-up man. Couple weeks later on Facebook, someone shared a picture of cursive writing. He made fun of the people who couldn't read it. I posted a picture of a clock and said, "What time does this say?" He blocked me. When I taught students how to tell time in French, I found out many didn't know how to tell time at all. Story 17. In the 3rd semester of software engineering, quite a few in my class didn't know Control-C, Control-V, Control-F, and a lot of other very basic computer stuff. Blew my mind. Half a semester of online classes, assignments, and exams later, everyone knows this stuff now. I became the go-to computer person in one of my classes when I told my professor to do Control-Shift-T to reopen a tab she accidentally closed. She thanked me at the end for helping with the lecture, but that was literally all I did. Story 18. As someone in IT, we get a lot of this. I don't know what it is about machines, but when a perfectly intelligent but non-IT person is in front of one, their brains just seem to turn off. I tried to close the window, and it's asking me if I'm sure I want to close it. What should I do? Or, I have this green cable and plugged it into the blue port. Why isn't it working? And finally, the laptop doesn't work anymore. It's just blank, no matter what buttons I push. A minute later of me fiddling with the machine and fixing it. Wait, there's a power button? Story 19. More of how do you not know how to do this? First year at uni, a girl in my halls microwaved some food and left it in the metal foil container. It took 3 fire engines to put out the fire, and we had to have a new kitchen installed. Not to mention, this was like at 3 a.m., and I had an exam the next day. I was not impressed. I was not impressed is the thing that identified this to me as a fellow British person's post. I can literally hear you saying it, inflections and everything. I, as your narrator, aren't doing the accent because I don't have a strong British accent. Anyway, story 20. Reading this thread made me realize my parents have done an amazing job preparing me for adult life. I need to go thank them now. I watched a mom teaching her child how to use the cappuccino machine yesterday. Mainly making sure he stopped before it was actually full since it keeps going after. I was like, yes, teach that child how to function in the real world. I saw a list before of all the things you teach your child before 18. Some of them had never even occurred to me. Story 21. Coworker announced she was pregnant, then immediately said she was sad that she couldn't take a bath until the baby was born. I stared, confused, and asked, "Why can't you take a bath?" She looked at me as though I was stupid and said, "Because the baby will drown." I had to walk away. Ah, yes, I hate it when my uterus fills with water any time I swim or take a bath, and I have to stand there legs wide and let it drain. Just what the hell? Story 22. I asked a friend to put a pot of pasta on while I showered after a long day. Had to run out of the shower dripping wet when the smoke alarm went off. He didn't know you put pasta in boiling water. He didn't know you put pasta in water at all. He just threw hard, raw pasta in a pot and put it on the stove. Guy was 23 and a computer scientist. Pretty sure he's at Microsoft now. Thinking about it now, maybe it was my fault for giving a programmer bad instructions. Story 23. I had spent the night at my ex-boyfriend's place and stayed a bit longer in the morning to help clean the house. I was folding some clothes when I noticed him go from one side of the bed to another without actually doing anything. I looked at him and he looked clueless. He said, "Can you please make the bed? I've never done this. No idea where to start." I didn't mean to have a strong reaction to it, but man, did it leave me speechless. He was 26 at the time. That day I realized his mother often visited his house to make the bed and clean. Yeah. Story 24. My apartment neighbor thought you had to pay for the ice in the ice maker in the fridge, thought he could bake cookies on a wooden cutting board in the oven, thought that raising the seat on his bike would make his legs longer and thus make him taller, lived there for 2 weeks before realizing they had an oven. Story 25. I had my motorbike CBT the other day, like a beginner-level bike test we have in the UK to ride 125cc, and the 40-year-old guy didn't know that we were driving on the left side of the road. He's English and has lived there his whole life. His excuse was, "I don't drive." You are beyond completely stupid if you've lived that long in your home country to not know what side of the road cars drive on. My 8-year-old brother could tell you. Story 26. My dad couldn't spread butter on his toast when he met my mom. PhD in neuroscience? No problem. Building a successful business? Piece of cake. Spreading butter on a bagel? Talk about unrealistic expectations. Story 27. Someone told me that their husband would put shampoo in their hair and not rinse after applying. The husband for his entire life wondered why his hair was always greasy. I can't imagine not rinsing the shampoo out. I can't stand it when my hair feels greasy. I bet he felt magical when he finally learned this and hopefully had actually clean hair. Story 28. Worked in a restaurant with a revolving door of employees. Apparently, once, when 2 of them were asked to sweep the dining room, one of them swept and the other held the dustpan. And yes, we had multiple brooms and dustpans. Oh, and in college, some people would put Tide pools in the detergent tray of the washing machines or put the dryer sheet in the lint tray of the dryers. Story 29. Explaining to a 35-year-old male friend that condoms aren't 100% effective and means you could use one and the other person could get pregnant. Next was that condoms mean you can get lower chances of STDs, but herpes in another location could occur if they have an outbreak. I felt like I needed a slideshow. It was like I butchered the Easter bunny and fed it to him as stew. Story 30. I had a female friend our junior year of college, so around 21-ish, tell me that you had to change your tampon every time you peed, because otherwise the pee would be blocked. I gently asked her if she knew there were, 2 different holes, and she adamantly told me how wrong I was. She was studying to be a nurse. Story 31. An older friend of mine didn't know what a wireless mouse was or how to use it. He was holding it in his hand and waving it in the air, trying to get information on screen like Tom Cruise in Minority Report. Frankly, I think he was ahead of his time rather than behind it. Story 32. Put rolls on the dispenser. Not even talking about the forwards or backwards nonsense. There isn't oxygen in the world to justify arguing about that. I walked into my bathroom the other day, a share house of 7 people, and found 6 part-used rolls distributed in random spots around the toilet and shelf. Wish I knew who it was. Story 33. My mother-in-law still doesn't know the difference between right and left. When giving her directions, I have to say, like the hand you write with, if she needs to go right. She also doesn't know the difference between north, south, east, and west, even though we live on an island where there are different elements, mountains and volcanoes, in each direction. Story 34. Frying an egg. He was in culinary school. When tasked with Egg Day, where they just cook eggs multiple times in multiple styles to get the basis of the techniques involved, he had gently plopped an egg, shell and all, into a buttered pan. His reasoning was that the heat of the pan would melt away the shell. Story 35. I dated a guy that would put conditioner first and then shampoo in his hair. When I pointed out that it was the other way around, he got really grumpy and said, "How is one supposed to know that?" I point to the instructions on the labels in the back. We never spoke about it again, but his hair got softer. Story 36. I came home from school one day, and a roommate of mine is frantically fanning away smoke from the stove. Turns out he was trying to cook pasta and just heated up the stove with no water and put the pasta straight into a hot pot. I was utterly baffled. Story 37. A friend of mine kept his social security card and birth certificate in his wallet and lost it. Luckily, nothing ever came of it, and he replaced them. But you'd be surprised how many people think it's okay to keep their sensitive documents in their wallet rather than in a safe location at home. Story 38. I worked with a woman who forgot how to cough. She was in her 30s and rarely got sick, but when she came down with a bad cold one winter, she just kept making these pathetic little squeaking sounds. I tried to help, but it's difficult to explain a natural reflex to someone. Story 39. There's a scary amount of people that apparently don't know AM from PM and try to schedule car service at or after midnight. Also, a surprising number of people who don't understand time zones. Story 40. A girl I worked with who was in her mid-30s only ate Lunchables because she didn't know how to grocery shop or cook. This was an improvement over when she just ate half my lunch every day. I packed extra because someone was always either broke or forgot their lunch. Story 41. I asked my husband to make some herbal tea for me the first year we were married. I walked into the kitchen to find him standing over the stove with a mug of water sitting directly on the burner. Poor baby. Story 42. Some teenagers that used to work for me didn't know how to tell time. They said, "Why should we learn when everything is digital now?" This was 10 plus years ago. Story 43. My friend is getting ready to microwave leftover fish with tinfoil covering the top. He was about to press start when I managed to get to him. Story 44. My ex was 25 and didn't know how to write a check, or how a dishwasher worked, or how to keep his peen in his pants.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.